This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include political consultant and communications consultant Brad Crone, syndicated columnist and author John Hood, NC Policy Watch's director Chris Fitzsimon, and former House Speaker Joe Mavretic. We got a really good show for you this week. We begin by examining whether public school principals really got the pay increases the lawmakers promised them. We'll discuss why the State Historical Commission delayed a decision about removing Confederate statues and explore why unaffiliated voters now outnumber Republicans in our state. Plus, as always, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. It's long been acknowledged that aside from the parent, the teacher is the most important contributor to a child's education. But coming in a close second is the school principal, who administers and provides the environment to encourage learning. North Carolina's pay for principals was at the bottom of southeastern states and among the lowest in the nation. But the legislature passed a law that both restructured how principals are paid and also provided bonus opportunities for them. But now that the dust has settled, it appears some of the principals not only won't get bonuses, but might see substantial pay cuts. Joe Mavretic, your son is a school principal, so no doubt you've studied this issue fairly carefully. What's your assessment of the new principal pay system?
Well, first of all, the Republicans did increase the salaries from, I think it was $59,000 to $63,000 a year base. However, most of the principals in North Carolina will probably see little, if any, increase in pay because changes will be made to local supplements. Remember that the General Assembly eliminated longevity or being paid for experience. Right. Assistant principals did pretty well because they get paid for advanced degrees. I think in the long run, a lot of principals are going to be encouraged to retire as soon as they can at 30 years. They'll be 52, 53 years old, certainly young enough for another experience in some place, probably in charter schools or in private schools.
Interesting. Brad, this new pay system moves us away from experience and numbers of teachers in the school to a performance-based merit system. This merit idea has always been a good sounding goal with teachers and administrators, but it's been difficult to implement. Is it reasonable to have principals paid based on the test scores of their students?
Well, you know, we've been talking about merit pay and a merit selection process for our educators. As far as I can remember, when I was a reporter working for you, Tom, back to 1982, I think the legislature really needs to look. You may want to measure it with some type of experience factor or longevity factor because, you know, every gray hair I have, I've earned, and I'm proud of them. And, you know, I think that in our school system today, we need some principals in our local school systems who have the experience, who've been through the process and can lend that experience and knowledge to younger principals and to younger educators.
Well, speaking of gray hair, Chris, you used to have gray hair, but he's now parting his like I part mine. This new system could actually backfire, couldn't it? As Joe says, the way it's going to work is it's going to award bonuses based on the school's performance of growth of test scores. So the principals that have schools who perform well consistently are not going to be getting those bonuses, are going to be perhaps seeing pay cuts as much as $10,000 to $30,000. Isn't there a better way of judging principal performance?
There is a better way. And first of all, a lot of this, if you back up, our principals were among the worst paid in the country. And instead of having a commission, which they're going to do on school finance, look at this for a year, call in principals, study other states, What did they do? They stuck a provision in the budget that they said was going to fix the problem. And what it has done now is create more problems and unfairness, number one. Number two, they don't seem to be fond of experience. I think maybe we should value things other than experience, but this General Assembly seems to be able to or want to run off veteran teachers who they give the smallest pay raises to, veteran principals. If one of the best principals in the state happens to be there 30 years, I don't think he or she should never get a pay raise again. And the same thing with teachers. So part of this problem is we're doing all this stuff in behind closed doors, sticking in a budget provision. Then we found out, oops, we have now great principals that might get a pay cut, and we got to come back and fix it. That speaks to the way
John,
we're doing
there's
things.
another aspect of this, and Joe talked about them putting in their 30 years and retiring, but the retirement benefits that people in the teachers and state employees retirement system get are largely based on the last 5 years, the highest 5 years of pay that they have. So this could really affect potential benefits for a school principal. Does that further enhance the idea that perhaps many of them are going to get in their 30 and leave?
No, because what's going to happen is most of these principals are going to make substantially more money than they previously did. It's important to remember that they had a provision in here that it was a hold harmless provision. It has been interpreted
for 1 year.
It has been interpreted to expire. That does not appear to be their original intent. They're going to take that out. There is going to be a hold harmless put in, which means this notion there are going to be all these principals getting all these pay cuts, I think, is completely not reality. So then what you're looking at is some principals will not get as much pay increase as they like. Others will get substantial pay increases. All of those will be folded into their retirement benefits.
I disagree with John. I think that at least half of the principals in North Carolina will get little increase. And when I talk little, I'm talking about $8 or $10 a month. I think a significant number, about 20 or 30%, will get pay increases and not much more.
Wow. And I assume that this comes from having talked
No,
with,
no, it doesn't. As a
just
matter of fact,
studying
no. As a matter of fact, Tom, I stay away from these kind of issues with my son and talk to principals in other schools, typically in Wake County, which is where we live.
Okay. All right. So, Brad, the big question is, John mentioned the fact that Senator Jerry Tillman and Craig Horn, who are the education chairs, are saying they're going to try to fix this. Is this going to happen in the upcoming special session that we're getting ready to have next week? Or is this going to be something that's going to have to wait till the short session? And if so, is that going to be a long enough, is it going to be too long?
Well, no, I think it will be too long. I don't know if they'll get to it in the special session. I do believe that they will get to it in the short session. I think they realize that they have made a mistake, that it was not the intent, the action of the legislation. That goes back to probably not airing it out in the process that they should have. But I think it will be addressed. Again, it comes back to the bottom line, though. It raises the question, is this enough? Are we paying our principals enough? And I would argue to you, we're not.
Interesting. Because they are very important to the education
Well, I
process.
think the bottom
Nobody
line on
denies
this one is that the unintended consequences of this particular act we'll be talking about on this show for 10 years.
Well, good. It gives us something to do. Each year, we encourage you to get involved with our friend and panelist Rufus Edmiston in his annual Super Kids fundraising event. This organization helps students with badly needed support in furthering their education. And this year's Super Kids fundraiser is going to be Thursday, October 26th from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Farmers Market Restaurant in Raleigh. Your $60 admission includes incredible buffet of food and drinks. And to learn more about it, you can contact the number on your screen, 919-829-1988, or email rufus@rufusedmiston.com. I want you to join me and many of our NC Spend regulars on the Super Kids benefit Thursday, October 26th. Again, that number is 919-829-1988 or rufus@rufusedmiston.com. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about the Historical Commission delaying monument moves.
NC Spend will return after these messages.
Agriculture is the backbone of our state's economy. It's the heartbeat of our rural communities. Its strength means bustling sidewalks and open signs in store windows. And with smart investments in our future, like the Plant Sciences Initiative and modern updated research stations, agriculture will remain the cornerstone of our economy. Because when agriculture is strong, our economy is strong.
Life's busy, but you are the master at managing it. Thanks to your know-how and some helpful tools. As a member of an electric cooperative, you have access to lots of innovative tools that help you better manage your home energy use and your budget, so you can stay focused on what's most important. Discover how your electric cooperative can help you control your energy use at EmpowerMeNC.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
The amount of rhetoric and emotion surrounding patriotism continues to escalate. Governor Cooper has advocated removing Confederate statues on the Capitol grounds as well as at other locations. Protesters on both sides of the issue have staged rallies on public property. The North Carolina Historic Commission met to consider moving some of these Confederate monuments, but decided to wait until next spring before determining the impact of actions as well as whether they had the actual authority to carry out the removals. Chris, aside from the actual issue of whether or not these statues make statements that are offensive to some, there's a 2015 bill passed by the legislature that clearly wants to make sure we preserve these monuments, but it also appears to give the Historic Commission authority to remove them. Was the commission correct in deciding to delay this decision?
Well, I was disappointed that they didn't make a decision, but I'm not sure I blame them. This law, I think, is very vague. There was actually a worse version that was first floated around that would have been even, I think a lot of people thought would be vaguer. They passed a bill that I think is not explicit enough. You know, when this issue first arose again, first of all, it came out in 2015. The Senate passed it with little controversy. Then the Charleston shootings happened, the horrible Charleston shootings. Nikki Haley, the governor, took down the Confederate flag, the battle flag from the South Carolina Capitol grounds. There started to be rumors here about Confederate monuments, so the House debate was very animated. But what happened was, after the latest incidents in Charlottesville, the legislative leadership says, well, you can't take these monuments down unless you get approval of the Historical Commission. Now it appears that legislative leaders are saying the Historical Commission under this law really doesn't have the ability to take the monuments down. So I think what we have here is a lot of people in the state believe a lot of these should be taken down. The law is too vague. The Historical Commission is trying to figure out what to do about it, and I think we have a mess.
Does anybody disagree that they made the wrong decision by not making a decision?
I think that the bottom line here is that the legislature's interpretation of their own law is much more persuasive than Governor Easley's. I think the Historical Commission didn't want to embarrass, I honestly think they didn't want to embarrass the governor by just saying no, and so they kicked it down the can down the road a few months. But the legislature's contention is not that they've never, as far as I know, contended the Historical Commission has the absolute authority to move statues around. Their position is that the legislation does not allow the removal of these things unless there are specific situations like the actual monuments are at risk of being damaged, or there's some sort of public safety potential, or a statue might fall down or something like that. And so the governor is trying to shoehorn in what he would like, a policy he believes in, that he would like to, he's trying to shoehorn it into a law that clearly does not allow it. And I don't know that the Historical Commission is going to give a different answer in a few months, but maybe they think it'll calm down by then.
I think Governor Cooper's taken a very King Solomon approach. He's willing to cut the baby in half. And provide an area of moving the monuments into a historical museum, battleground, and providing a historical context of these. I think they're relics of the monuments, but I think he's been very measured in how he's approached this.
Joe, some people are saying that the Historical Commission just wanted to get out of the political crosshairs of a fight. Perhaps maybe hoping the fervor of all of this might have died down by next spring. What are your chances of that?
I don't think it's going to die down, and I don't blame them for ducking. They found cover, and probably for their individual points of view, it's a very good position.
It's also worth pointing out, a lot of Governor Cooper's talking about the monuments on state property. The other controversy is the monuments on local government property. So local governments were allowed to put these monuments up, many of them in the early 1900s, and now we have a state law that says local governments can't take their monuments down that they put up, in effect. And so Governor Cooper's also called for that law to be repealed and give the authority back to local governments to govern their own affairs, which I hope they do.
So I want to go around the table here. What's your prediction as the ultimate outcome of this decision, John?
I do not think that any of these monuments will be moved or removed or done anything with unless the legislature decides to do so.
Interesting. Brad?
I think we need to get the monuments down. I think they represent an era of hate that really we don't need to represent in our state anymore.
Joe?
I cannot disagree more with that position. I'm thinking, what are we going to do about those battlefields that are national battlefields? Are we going to take all the Confederate cannons away? Are we going to go to Vicksburg, for example, and take those away?
It's time to stop fighting the Civil War,
Well,
Joe.
no, it's not time to stop fighting, as a matter of fact, and this is just one more divisive issue today.
Chris, what's your opinion on this? Are we getting ready to see more court action here?
I think we might see some more court action, but I also think, there's threatened court action about Silent Sam and Chapel Hill. I do think the law is not as nearly as cut and dried as the General Assembly thinks it is. That may be the court decision. I wish the General Assembly, at the very least, would either allow the Historical Commission to make decisions and would allow local governments who put the monuments up to decide whether or not to take them down. And I think they should come down.
They sure put them in a hot seat, didn't they?
They did.
There's no question about that. And if they end up by removing them, then they're not going to like what they created. Interesting. We're going to take a break. After these messages, we're going to talk about unaffiliated registrations now in second place.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The North Carolina General Assembly recently gave state retirees a well-deserved cost of living increase. Now local governments across North Carolina need to follow the legislature's lead and include retiree cost of living increases in their budgets. These increases are long overdue and desperately needed by all our retirees. The legislature heard us, and they did what's right. It's time for local governments to do the same. Learn more at ncrgea.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
As of last week, there were 6.8 million registered voters in our state. When I first started covering politics back in the dark, deep recesses of history, the 1960s, there were 3 Democrats registered to every 1 Republican. But over several decades, we've seen Republicans gaining in percentages, and most recently, the number of unaffiliated voter registrations has been increasing very rapidly. As of now, Democrats account for 39% of the voters, and both unaffiliated and Republican registrations have 30.3%, with the unaffiliated registrations having a slightly larger number. Brad Crone is someone who watches all of this very closely. Tell us why Democrats are declining as a percentage, Republicans are relatively static, and unaffiliated voters are increasing so rapidly.
Well, I'm a recently newly minted unaffiliated voter after 37 years of being a Democrat. And I think the problem for the Democrats is, and for the Republicans, is purification within the party. And any centrist or middle of the road type voter is really left without a party. You look at what happened in Alabama this week, you look at the dogfight that's going on in Charlotte right now between Reverend Harris and Pittenger. You look at the internal fights that you're seeing here in the legislature within the Democratic caucus, where you have a website, liberal website, attacking centrist, middle of the road, Main Street Democrats. And I think people
and the same is true in the Republican Party.
Absolutely. I mean, they're just there. It's dog eat dog, and both parties are moving further and further to the polar ends, and the people in the middle are caught in no man's land.
So, John, what message should Democrats be taking from this? Going, as I said, back from the 60s, where it was 3-1, to where it's now slightly less than 40%, 4 and 10.
Well, I mean, Democrats have been declining fairly consistently for decades. Republicans actually have been in a sort of a 30 to 32% band for decades. So the big story is obviously the rise of the unaffiliated voter. As Brad has said, some of this has to do with ideology. There's no question about that. The Democratic Party in North Carolina is more consistently progressive on a variety of issues than it used to be. The Republican Party, somewhat more consistently conservative than it used to be. But another part of the story is just Americans, young Americans in particular, are just not joiners the way they used to be. Keep in mind that most unaffiliated voters vote 80 to 90% for Democrats or 80 to 90% for Republicans. The number of unaffiliated voters who are actually swing voters is only about 10, 12% of the population. So we need to get not too carried away with how people are registered. How they vote is still 40-something% Democrat, 40-something% Republican, about the same over time.
But Chris, what message should Republicans be getting out of all of this? Their numbers have been relatively static.
Right.
It rose much during the 90s and early part of the century, but it's pretty static.
Well,
now.
And going back to the 60s, 3-1, I mean, Jesse Helms was a Democrat. Everybody in North Carolina was a Democrat in the 50s and the early 60s, and then they started as the really conservative Democrats started switching to Republicans. That accounts for a lot of the historical switch. Both parties, I think, are losing out to the unaffiliated voters for a lot of the reasons John said. And also, parties don't play nearly as big a role in the election machinery as they used to.
True.
They play, there are only 2 candidates generally on the ballot, which is, I think, sometimes a shame. And John is right that the vast majority of unaffiliated voters have an ideology of their own that comes across when they vote.
I want to dovetail on that, Joe, because North Carolina has some of the strictest ballot access laws of any state in the country. When we've only got Republicans and Democrats who are able to have primaries and get on the ballot, shouldn't we be easing the restrictions on ballot access for unaffiliated registrations and candidates?
Well, we should, but we won't, because neither party wants to do that, and these kind of changes have to come from within the General Assembly. But I want to go back a little bit to what John said. Time magazine has recently come out with an article that talked about disarray in the Democratic Party. The interesting thing to me about that whole column or article was that we have these new words coming in like progressive. Progressive is really a word for democratic socialism by any political definition.
All right, Brad.
I don't think so, but go ahead.
All right, Brad. Let me follow back up on the question so far as ballot access, and also so far as appointments to boards and commissions, because many of the legislation...
unaffiliated voter in North Carolina deserves access to the boards, commissions. It's a simple fact. The party system don't want the competition.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
We're still debating the last segment, but now it's time to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, I'll start with you.
Well, we talk a lot about polls on this show and how politicians are doing. That's one way to measure it. I was just public policy polling recently had a poll that showed Roy Cooper's approval rating is 15 points positive, and in fact, it's like 51 to 35, I think. I went back and looked. At the same point in their governorship, Governor Perdue's approval rating was a minus 25%, 10 months into her term. Governor McCrory's approval rating was a minus 12%. Governor Cooper basically was in a tie with Governor McCrory in the last election, barely won. He's up 15% in the polls. People like him.
All right, Joe Mavretic, tell us something we don't know.
For 15 years, we've been talking about university system failing to graduate at least 3,000 teachers every year that we need. This assembly has done something about it. So on this show and in the press for a long time, we're going to start hearing about professional educator preparation and standards and educator preparation programs.
Easy for you to say.
Easy for me to say, but these are now in a commission.
Enrollment in education courses, by the way, is up in our university system this semester.
What this does is to say you don't have to go to university to get a teacher's certificate.
Brad Crone, tell us something we don't know.
Nervous Nellies at NC State University over the NCAA FBI Department of Justice investigation involving Adidas footwear and the basketball programs. Patino, Louisville in trouble. It's far-reaching, a tsunami across basketball, and you know, Lord knows North Carolina loves its basketball. Was there problems at NC State University?
Interesting. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
By the deadline, 29 organizations have applied for charters to create new charter schools by 2019. If they're approved, that would put the number of charter schools, I think, above 200 now in North Carolina.
All right.
Substantial number.
And we'll be following that story as we go along also. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.